Now's your chance to get into every nook and cranny. Get all this stuff off. Clean everything. The bump stops are held in place with rivets. After attacking them with the cutoff wheel, a cold chisel, grinder, or some combination thereof, you grind them flat or cut them flat with the inside of the frame rail. You can then separate the bump stop, just down here, from the frame rail. We're going to do that by sticking a cold chisel between the two and just popping it loose. Once we've ground off the rivets on the inside, we put a cold chisel between the bump stop and the frame, and just we're going to whack it. You can see this one's already coming off. You can see the way the rivets are sunken down, that we've ground them off enough. Right? They're already popping through. This guy's being a little stubborn. There's always one that's stubborn. There's always one rivet that gives you trouble. Not that much trouble. As a sanity check, I've made my own template off the actual parts. Well, here we have the side marked out according to our template. Ready to cut. Okay, here we're making a test fitting. We've slid the piece on as far as it will go easily by hand. You can see on the inside that we're quite tight. You can see on the inside that we're quite tight. It's the cutout is tucked right up against the piece that we're adding. Very, very tight. We're just a little too tight right down here in this corner. So this piece on the bottom here needs to be opened up just a little bit, ground out. To be honest, with the small sledge, I could pound that on and it would fit. And we do want it to be that tight, hammer tight. We want it to be very closely fitted. That's how you're going to get the most strength. Not, don't remove more of the frame than you have to remove. That way, if you decide you want to burn it, put a weld across the bottom, across this cross member piece, you can do that. I wouldn't weld across the, well, don't put your hand in front of the lens. I wouldn't weld across the frame, the top web of the frame, but on the side, once we get it actually fitted, if you wanted to burn these angles, that would be acceptable. There's not a lot of stress on the web part, actually. Most of the stress in compression and tension is carried by the top and bottom webs. This part here, the web in between, not as much of the stress. That's why all the factory holes are here. And, well, okay, to be honest, this frame from the factory comes like Swiss cheese. There's so many holes in it. But, yeah, there's an advantage to burning a couple of the welds, or making a couple of welds to the frame, in that you'd be locating the device with the welds and not with the threaded fasteners. Threaded fasteners are not used for locating two parts together. They're used for clamping. They're not used for locating. That's why head bolts are used in conjunction with dowels on cylinder heads, right? The dowel locates the cylinder head, the bolts just clamp it together. Here's the final fitment. You can see how tight that is. That's what we want to see. It's like pretty darn good. You wanted to weld that up, or if you just leave it as they intend. One place that I really consider welding is right here, this root right there. Most of the strength in a C-section of frame like this comes from the top and bottom rail. The web in the middle doesn't carry as much load. That's where most of the factory holes are drilled, right in the center of that web. You can see the top is contiguous still, but the bottom isn't. It's interrupted by the giant bite we took out of it. And if we weld on both sides, just one weld, now it's contiguous again. And that's important for transferring the stress, the loads across this gap. Now, talking about corrosion, there is no gap. This surface is flat against that, right? There is a gap here, right? Because this is rounded and this is also rounded from a bend, but they had to make sure that this radius, had material out because you didn't want it to be, hung up on the corner there and then unable to actually go all the way flat. So, the instructions that come with the kit don't even address that at all, and but it does need to be addressed, I think. So we're going to do a little stitch weld on this, but that in no way, shape, or form is going to seal it because we're going to leave this giant gap open, and there's one other one on the bottom, and we're not going to weld that top at all. And there's not a lot of water that gets there, but quite a bit does. So you got wheels right here, and they're splashing, So my approach is going to be to weld those parts indicated, to torque these bolts. And then what I'm going to do in all these areas, all the way around, after everything is cleaned up and painted, is to use seam sealer, automotive seam sealer. This is stuff that in the factory they used different body panels that were assembled and never meant to be taken apart. They would use seam sealer, and I've taken a 50-year-old cars apart, and the seam sealer was still working like on day one. So you can get it. It's available in the aftermarket, and so all possible ingresses for water are going to be sealed with seam sealer, including these bolts. These bolts are never intended to be taken apart. Once you bolt this stuff together, it's together for the life of the frame. Why would you ever take it apart? And if you did, you just scrape the seam sealer off. It's a removable, a reversible process. It's not permanent like welding. So I'll literally sealer on every bolt, both sides, front and back. I'll see every seam that is open. We'll get a healthy dose of seam sealer, and that will keep the water out and will keep us corrosion free. And this is the product we're using, which is just from Eastwood, high solid seam sealer in black. There's a lot of different viscosities of this product offered. They have everything from liquid formulations that are self-leveling that you use for like on the drip rail of a cab, where it will self-level itself, or this stuff, which is more like caulk, right? You'll run a bead, and you use a regular garden variety caulking gun. Well, here's the final product, C-notch. Looks pretty good. I think it has just the right artistically sloppy and careless touch with the seam sealer. It just looks, dare I say, like it could have been factory. It really does just fit in. Looks fine, lasts a long time.